With 50 plus years of combined produce, supply chain, entrepreneurial, and business experience, Craig Slade and Ed Bertod discuss the impacts of fresh produce on their lives and health. This podcast is a casual conversation between two friends just trying to get better. This is the Fresh CrEd.
Well, hey, good morning, everyone, and it's good to see all you here. We have obviously a new face in the room, Ed. We have another Ed, or at least an Eddy, who is joining us. Eddy Badrina is joining us from. You're there in beautiful Texas. Is that correct, Eddy?
I am. I'm in Dallas, Fort Worth.
Excellent. Well, my near and dear to my heart. That's my hometown. Born there outside of Dallas in beautiful Mesquite, Texas.
Okay.
So, actually, I was born in Dallas, a Methodist hospital, but grew up in Mesquite. So,
okay.
And I am coming to everybody from a location out in Florida, out here for the SEPC, and taking an opportunity to break away from the action here at SEPC to have a chat with Eddy Badrina, who is got an exciting story, Ed. He is going to tell us about his journey and produce. And like I say, pretty excited to have him join us on this. So
thanks for having me.
I know you. And Ed, I think you're pretty familiar with the high-tech space of produce, correct?
Which Ed?
Ed.
I'm Ed. Right?
I go say, I guess Ed Bertod.
I'm super
Eddie,
high tech.
I'm gonna say Eddy B.
I
have to call you. Yeah. So I know that's your space. So yeah, Eddy. So the Eddy that we're interviewing, I guess I'd like to kick it off by just finding out, how you got into produce, because I don't think that was your original plan. Although you are an Aggie, which I got to tell you what, I mean, everybody that knows me knows that I am the biggest Aggie that didn't actually go to Texas A&M. So
we have a lot of those. It's like people say in Texas, like I was, born in Virginia, but Texan by the grace of God. That's how a lot of Aggies feel about, you may not even have gone to A&M, but you realized you try to get there in spirit as quick as you could. So I love it.
There's no doubt about Craig. That. Yeah. So my brother graduated A&M, so I claim his graduation as part of my connection with Texas A&M.
Yeah, so. Through kin. I like it. Yeah, my background is not in ag, apart from the Aggie ring, right? I'm a technology guy. And it was actually as interesting. I was out at Indoor AgCon. I was just there in Vegas speaking on a panel, and I was talking to a number of CEOs. It's surprising how many, like the CEO of Plenty, for instance, he invested in ag tech, but he did not study that at university or grew up doing it. He was more in the financial world. But I think you're seeing with our especially with vertical farming, and then with greenhouses, sort of the controlled environment ag space is what we're talking about. With CEA, you're seeing a lot of non-ag background people coming in and just taking a different approach and a different view to agriculture. And I think that's needed. Where it gets the rub is, a lot of these folks come in and they don't take the time to understand the industry and all the nuances. And so that's the difficult part. You got these technologists that are coming in like bulls in China shops. And on the other side, you've got the industry vets who are seeing change and just having a hard time wrapping their minds around that or moving to it. And so that's where you're seeing a lot of the rub and the conflict and just kind of the misunderstanding. So my whole goal coming into this was for the first 2 years of me being CEO of Eating Green was, one, to get the business in order and take it to market really prove out the technology from a commercial proof of concept and then take it to market. But the other was just to sit back and listen to the industry and hear where the market is, where the industry is, and how we can best complement traditional farmers and not be so bull in China shop. So yeah, my background's not in it. It's in technology. And
I guess go back. I mean, you start. I know your story, but everybody on here
yeah,
doesn't exactly know your story. So if you could take us back, because again, as you and I talked, I mean, it's you're now at this space, not just about the produce and making sure everybody has as lettuce, right? You
right.
got to you kind of have a bigger mission, but take us back to how you wound up here, if you could.
Yeah. So after A&M, I went up into Washington, D.C., and actually worked in government for 6 years. So I was in foreign policy for 4. And then for 2, I was President Bush's Asian American spokesperson. So that was 04 to 06. But then after that, I came back to Texas, and after wandering around in the wilderness for about 4 years of the career wilderness, I found a niche, and the niche was in digital marketing and marketing technology. So I started a company called BuzzShift with a business partner in 2010. So we bootstrapped it from scratch, no loans, no lines of credit. Actually ran that and grew that organically to where we sold in 2016, and it was a great opportunity to have a liquidity event. And then we bought it back 11 months later because the acquiring company and we did not see eye to eye. And and in good entrepreneurial fashion, I sold high and bought low, so it was great. And then we just proceeded to run it again. But I think during that time where I had stepped away from it, and I was still working with BuzzShift, but I had a much lesser role. I really started to think about like, hey, what's next in my life. Right, everyone goes through sort of that midlife crisis, and it really is. When it comes down to it, it's a crisis of identity. And when I stepped away from BuzzShift, or at least when I sold it, a part of my identity was sort of stripped away, and I was left with, okay, what do I really want to do, right? If the baby that I born and brought up finally left the home, so to speak, in terms of business sense, what am I left with? So that began probably a 2-year journey of me trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, and more importantly, what my identity was. So from there, I figured out one is whether I started another business or not, my identity is whole, right? As a as someone who's loved by God, as a husband, as a father, as a son, and just as a friend, my identity was good to go. So then that really freed me up to think about, okay, with that in place, what am I free to do, right? Who am I free to be? And that's where I really spent some time thinking about. What I figured out was, I wanted to run a hardware software company. I had been there, done that, gotten the M&A t-shirt. So I was done with that for professional services. The second is I wanted to have an exponential impact relative to my level of effort. So for every 1 unit of effort that I put out, I wanted to see a 10 to 20x return, specifically on culture and society around me. And then the third thing that I realized, and again, this was not overnight. This is it was a slow process. But the third thing I realized is I wanted to run what's called a redemptive organization. So there's a group up in New York City called Praxis Labs, and they espouse that there are 3 types of organizations, nonprofit, for-profit, in this world. The first is the exploitative organization, and that's where leaders eat first. That's where employees are treated unfairly. And that's where society is a net negative because of these organizations. You find them all over the place. Leaders are out just to make a buck. And they're very exploitative of the community, of the environment, and of their employees. A lot of those out there. The second type of organization is called an ethical organization. And those are the ones that we see that get highlighted and ought to be highlighted, right? That's where leaders eat alongside their employees. There's a lot of parity, equality. There's the employees are treated fairly, and then lastly is the community and society around them is neutral or advanced because of them. In those ethical companies, I mean, you can name them, like Whole Foods probably is around up there, Patagonia is probably up there, Charity Water's up there, right? Those are all
Right.
great and ethical. The problem with ethical companies is they're run by humans, and humans, as ethical as they want to be, will almost always slide back to some sort of exploitative or that first type of organization. It's just
Right.
it's just part of the human nature, right? So there's got to be a better way, and the better way to do it is to structure the company so that it forces people to be not just ethical, but actually redemptive. Like there's a framework around that, and those are redemptive organizations. And the redemptive organizations are one where leaders eat last, they're sacrificial, and you actually hire based on that core value of eating last. The second is employees are not just treated fairly, they're treated generously, right? And I can get into some of how we're trying to practice that here at Eden Green. And then lastly is the organization, the community around the organization, the society and culture is not just advanced, but it's actually renewed and restored because that organization exists, right? So it's actually fixing a problem, a known problem, and coming up with a solution that's way more beneficial than actually the original thing before it was broke, right?
Right.
So I wanted to do those three things, right? I wanted to run hardware, software, wanted to have exponential impact on society, and three, I wanted to run a redemptive organization. So that was what I came up with, and just through a series of events, happened upon Eden Green, and I wasn't looking for an ag company, but it checked all three of those boxes really, really quickly. So stepping back from BuzzShift for the second time was what I call the easiest hard decision I ever made, because I knew that it had checked all those boxes, and I knew that's what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. So and which is again, I mean, I think that what you're talking about is huge, right? In terms of not just the fact that the world needs more organizations like that. People need places to work, but like I say, the exponential impact that you're talking about having on society and on people, I think is amazing. So I'm curious. So Eden Greens, don't outside of you, I don't know much about their start and how they they check these boxes for you. Tell where did they start at? I mean, I know you guys have some facilities there close to Dallas, but tell us a little bit about Eden Greens and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, so it's actually a really, really cool story that was actually a big part of why I came on as CEO. So in 2010, two brothers in South Africa, Jacques and Eugene Van Buren, they were engineers, right, building houses, and one was a mechanical engineer, and they were passing out food in Johannesburg, where they lived, in Joburg. There's just a lot of shanty towns, and there's a lot of people in need, and so they were passing out food there. And there's actually at a community event with bounce houses and everything else, and they're passing out some candy. And this 5-year-old kid, this boy, 5-year-old boy, comes up and starts stuffing his pockets with candy. And they said, "Man, hold on. You don't need to hoard it. There's enough for everyone." And they asked his teacher, and they said, "Hey, what's the deal with him? What's his, what's the background?" And the teacher said, actually, it's his 3-year-old sister back at home. It's her day to eat and not his. So he's taking the food back home to her, taking the candy back home to her. Yeah. Wow was right. And it really struck a chord with them. And they said, "Man, what world are we living in where we can't, kids have to choose which day to eat?" So that from them that just embarked a long, long journey to try to figure out how to grow greens in such a way that were really efficient and really, cost effective, so that everyone could eat, right, and not just on their day. So, literally invented in their garage, they created a prototype of what would become our patented technology now, and it was just this little cup, and around this cup sits a plant, and not using soil, but using different types of grow medium that this plant that could hydroponically grow. But then the climate around it, from the water to the air to the nutrients, everything would be controlled around this little cup. It's what we call our microclimate. So think about it. All of us are sitting in our various homes and offices, and imagine if no one had HVAC. We all had these little backpacks on us that blew 69-degree air around us all the time, right? But then everywhere else around us was 85, 90, whatever the ambient temperature was, right? And maybe they would have some air conditioning that would, keep it at 85. It would be much, much more efficient, right? And much more but much more centralized and focused on us. Well, it's the same way with our technology. In an 1.5-acre greenhouse, we have 18-foot tall towers with these cups that they've invented, and they've made it into just huge 18-foot towers, and each tower has 36 plant spots. But those plant spots are all controlled. The microclimate around each plant spot is controlled. So such that when those are controlled, you don't really need to worry about anything else in the greenhouse. So that sounds like, okay, that's cool. But when you start to multiply that out, what that equals is you're only conditioning 1/5 of that entire volume of that 62,000 square foot greenhouse, right? When you're only doing 1/5 of that greenhouse in terms of conditioning and in terms of electricity costs, in terms of HVAC costs, right? And then you pop that up over 18 feet and it goes all the way. It's like a football field. So 1.5 acres is roughly the size of the football field, plus some stands around it, plus some bleachers, right? 18 feet
Right.
high. If you can imagine all of that full from top to bottom, but you're really only worried about 1/5 of that volume, what you get is a very, very efficient greenhouse / vertical farm that produces the equivalent of 40 acres of traditional farming land in an 1.5 acres.
Wow.
Just under 2 million pounds of leafy greens. And when you're doing it at that 1.5 acres, you're using 99% less land. We use 95% less water. We waste 95% less water than that. And we do it in such a way, because it's cost efficient, you can actually put that way closer to the consumer. So you're going from 2,000 miles away, which is where 75, 80% of our lettuce and leafy greens are grown over in California, and you're bringing it 20 miles, 2 miles, or in our case, 1,000 feet from a distribution center. That totally changes the calculus for how we get our produce, and it changes the calculus of how much that produce costs and how long that lasts in store and then in the pantry. That is the game changer that we're talking about. So from these guys whose heart was for this little kid comes this ability to feed a lot of people affordably, safely, and in a fresh, hyper local manner that just hasn't been done before. That's why I got into it.
Well, that's again, I knew the story, and it certainly is. It speaks to me. I can't say probably I'm as far down your journey as I would like to be, but it's an amazing story, and really admirable to think about that. And for us, for Ed and I, and the industry, that's the good news about the business we're in. Not only can you be on this journey to, you know, get these kids food, right, or just help, you know, get food to people, but you're getting healthy food. I mean, you talk about the young man was stuffing his pockets full of candy. You're actually bringing a vehicle to where they can stuff their pockets with maybe food that's actually nutritious and
Yeah.
good, and it's going to help them,
Well, and
along
that's,
the way.
that's the
So,
thing too, is if you grow this in a good way, and it's actually the plants are getting the nutrients that they get, the light that they get, the CO2, and it's consistent and it's year round. One, you're able to produce delicious food. So my kids are totally, I've got an 18-year-old, 13-year-old, and 9-year-old. They are totally spoiled by eating our greens. Like, it tastes like nothing they've ever tasted before. They won't really eat any other salads unless I bring stuff home, because it just tastes so
right,
good. Right. So
right,
from a consumer perspective, and we all ought to be consumer focused, from a consumer perspective, it brings a new facet to the it flips the mantra of, well, sometimes you just have to eat your vegetables, right? Well, now it's like, no, you want to eat your vegetables because it's that good, right?
right.
And it's not just us. There are a ton of other companies doing it. We just happen to be focusing on leafy greens and herbs, and some berries, but peppers too. But really, it's changing the way that people look at vegetables from a having to eat to wanting to eat, which goes to y'all's own personal journey about that. I think the second thing that it brings is it brings an affordability and accessibility, right? We're all used to shopping at the Whole Foods and the high end super Targets and Sprouts and all that stuff, and we can get those fresh greens. But if you go further on down the supply chain to folks in food deserts, to folks here in South Dallas, to folks in,
Mm-hmm.
South Fort Worth, Southeast Fort Worth, and in y'all's area, um, they don't get this fresh produce. They maybe have one grocery store in a 3 or 4 mile radius. So you know where they're getting their food from? C stores and bodegas, right?
Yeah,
That's not a great place to get it, right? But it's because the economics don't work, nor does the supply chain work for those C stores to get produce that's going to last anywhere close to what's worth selling, right? And then same with those lower end grocery chains. But if you can somehow change the margins on this, which is what I'm a businessman first, and so if I can somehow change the margins so that this fresh food, which is also local, isn't just relegated to farmers markets and community gardens, but it's able to be distributed in an efficient manner all the way down the supply chain, then you're really changing people's lives. I talk a lot about psychology because I was a psychology major, right? And at A&M. And there's a psychological quick decision that happens every time you walk into a grocery store. So every time you look into a grocery store, you probably see 150 people in there. There are 150 decisions being made every second on what to buy. The first decision is almost always in the produce section, because that's the first. You grab your cart, and what's immediately facing you? It's produce on the left-hand side. That's almost always where it is, right?
yeah,
There's a reason for that, right? It's a psychological. There's a psychological placement for produce there when you enter the grocery store. It draws you in. But once you're in the produce section, you immediately are drawn to color and you're drawn to price, right? And then quality. And if you're sitting across there, from the lettuce section, the leafy green section, the fruit section, and you see wilted greens, or you see so little selection, right? And then you've had a history of that. The split second psychological decision is, do I want to spend $5 on a bag of lettuce or a clamshell of lettuce that historically has only lasted me 3 or 4 days? Or do I want to go save that $5 and go further on down the line towards the middle of the store, right? And we all know, like, if you want to eat well, shop at the perimeters. Don't go into the middle. The middle's where all the
Right.
processed food is. So that's where, that decision takes place, not just once, but again and again and again as you shop. So if we can change that psychological decision to where one time they get really fresh greens, they pay $5 for it or $4 for it or whatever it is, they forget about it for a week in their refrigerator, like everyone does. But then when they pull it back out, it's still good. That is a fundamental change in shopping decision making, in a shopper's decision making, so that when they go back and they trust and they have a surety and a consistency, they see the same thing again on the shelf. They're like, well, I think I'll buy that again because I know it lasted me at least a week and it was still good. And it's the same price, and it's here in December as it was in March, as it was in July. You are altering the way they shop.
Eddy, what you're describing, would you consider it to a certain degree impulse buying, or is that separate? Is that, if you're buying something
So-
that you typically don't consume, that's, I like to think about it mainly with tropicals because I don't eat that many tropicals. So when I do, it's
Right.
sort of an impulse buy, right? This looks great. I want to try it, or I've never tried it
Right.
before. Is that?
I think there's two parts of it. There's the impulse buy that, and it's usually brand driven or like varietal driven. Like, oh, I want to try that, right? There's impulse buy, and that can lead to more sustainable habitual buying. But what I'm really talking about is habitual buying. You're going again and again and again, week after week. Just as we get, I don't know, bottled water, or we get bananas, or we get bread, or we get, meats, that needs to become a habitual buying pattern. But at least with meats, you can go freeze it, and so it lasts, right? With varietals, you're going to eat, like bananas, your kids are just going to eat it every day, right? They're used to that. People aren't used to eating greens every single day because the taste or the quality or the freshness or the ability to last in the refrigerator is so inconsistent. Once you change that, you're not just changing buyer patterns. All of a sudden, you're changing nutritional habits. And that's where you guys, I think, it really resonates with y'all and with me. If you change an adult's nutritional habit, you're going to change their kids. It's just a fact, right? No adult is going to eat super, super, super healthy and it not trickle down to their kids. It may not trickle all the way down, but there will be elements of what they eat. I mean, I see it in my own household, right? The more we buy better foods, even the better processed foods, but the more we buy fresher and better foods, guess what? That's all the kids get to choose from. Like, I don't have a separate pantry for my kids. I don't know a lot of folks that do either. It's you eat what you eat, right?
Yep.
So just by thinking about that from a split second shopper's decision, you're affecting whole households in the way they eat. And when you affect households in the way they eat, you affect communities in the way they eat. Because then you start to get that aggregate market demand. The grocers start to they have to carry that stuff because people are just asking for it, or they just won't shop there anymore, right? That's where, but it all starts at the individual level. And I would submit that it starts at the decision-based level.
That's interesting.
So, Eddy, what all are you guys growing currently? And then, and what are you growing, and how are you, so with all of this, with technology, with everything, how are you able to ultimately keep the cost competitive? Because at the end of the day, people are only going to buy what they can only afford, but
Yeah.
also it's going to need to be comparative to what else they're buying.
Sure.
So couple of questions there. What are you guys growing, and how are you keeping the cost to where you can actually get it to the consumer at a fair price?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our technology, we've grown around 225 different varietals in our greenhouses.
Wow.
And profitably and commercially viable, there are about 75 different varietals that we've tested out to a large scope, right? Where there's a statistically significant data sample of growing and comparing it to market rates. So what we've chose to focus on, and we continue to do testing and innovation on seed genetics and varietals, but what we're really focused on are the three that I mentioned before: leafy greens, herbs, and peppers. It just makes the most sense for our specific type of technology.
So when you say peppers, what kind of peppers are you doing?
Oh man, we've got some great sweet bell peppers, as well as your spicy ones, right? And so that's really from a volume perspective and from a margin perspective, that's what makes the most sense for us. And then within that, we are hyper focused on lettuce, and specifically romaine, whole head romaine. We can grow whole head romaine year round consistently at a 5 ounce, 6 ounce per head sort of unit, right? And I think a lot of your folks will be able to translate that, less about pounds and more about units and clamshells and cases and case equivalents, right? Now we're getting to the industry talk, but really we can grow a 5 ounce whole head of romaine lettuce, really good lettuce, in 21 days.
Wow.
Yeah. So that extrapolates out to, somewhere in the range of, 1.8, 1.9 million pounds of greens. We're the second greenhouse that we're building. It's all pre-sold, by the way. We're not even done building it, and all the harvest is pre-sold in a long-term contract. That greenhouse alone will produce around 70 to 80,000 heads a week.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. And it's consistent top to bottom.
I'm trying to think, I should have looked this up, but I saw a quote, because in this CEA space, I mean, everybody, for our industry, everything is, I mean, that's where all the money's going. I mean, you can see this tidal wave coming, right, in the space that you're in, that's going to take over our business. But I think the quote was they anticipate within the next, I think it's 3 years, 4 years, 50% of all leafy greens will be 50% of it will be consumed via production out of CEA.
Yeah, I think that was it was either Shenandoah or Solely Organic, which is what they're called now, Solely or Bright Farms. One of the two guys said it.
Yeah, it was one of those guys. Yeah. So.
I mean, I have no reason to dispute them. I think that's interesting, right?
It's pretty bold. That's a bold.
It's pretty bold,
yeah.
Right? I hope that's the case. Here's the reality. I mean, for us, and I'll just tell you, like, you asked about cost, and I'll get to that in a second. Yeah. But here's the reality. I could build 80 greenhouses producing 1.8 to 1 million pounds of just romaine lettuce. I would only capture 5% of the lettuce market. Literally, the lettuce market is an $8 billion industry. Not leafy greens, not produce, just lettuce.
Yeah.
Right? Retail, wholesale, food service, hospitality. That's a big number, guys. Mm-hmm. So, and unironically, that's our goal. I mean, our goal is to, in the next 5 to 7 years, we want to build 80 of these greenhouses all around the nation, really close to distribution centers, to be able to start to have this mesh network of greenhouses that can deliver hyper local, hyper fresh greens. So the vision for us is to have greenhouses infrastructure, right? We want to be the most ubiquitous, unsexy infrastructure out there. But that's just producing pound after pound of affordable greens. So you get the cost. Well, how are you going to do that? And this is the crux of the CEA industry. And the dirty secret is hardly anyone is profitable. They're subsidizing their sales, right? And it's because, and I told this, so at Indoor AgCon, I probably ruffled some feathers when I said, hey, if you're not moving towards profitability really quickly, or if you're not profitable, you're a hobby. That,
Yeah.
it is true. It's really
That's a
true.
fact.
It's a fact.
I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, the money that's coming into this, nobody's putting money into these operations that don't expect to get a return at some point.
Right. And they're all,
Yeah,
everyone's really chasing for that. Right. But not a lot of people have hit it. I know of two folks, two different companies in the industry besides us that are really focused on unit economics and that have actually achieved the unit level economics that are needed to expand really well. And not surprisingly, they're well on their way. But from a cost perspective, the way that we're able to do this is because of our technology. Again, there are all these little things that add up for us for Eating Green within our organization and within our technology. The fact that we're wasting so little water, the fact that we're using microclimates, the fact that we have a closed loop system, the fact that we control not just the air and the air temperature, but the humidity, the CO2 levels, the water temperature. And, a lot of your audience will know that, for a lot of plants, there's a certain degree of temperature that is the optimal temperature, water temperature for nutrient uptake. Well, if it differs from when it comes out of the pump to when it lands to the plant spot or to the next plant or to the next plant spot, you're going to have an inconsistency in nutrient uptake. We've solved for that, right? So we have consistent water temperature throughout the greenhouse 24/7 to each plant spot. When you do start to add all of those things up, you get really high yields, pounds per square foot. And I said this at Indoor AgCon, we need to have industry standards. I threw some standards out and I actually gave them our numbers as well, just as an act of transparency, but also to kind of throw the gauntlet down and say, hey, try to beat us. Because if you try to beat us and you do, you're raising the whole industry, right? So I love competition. Now, I hate to lose, but I love competition, right?
Right. No.
So, we're doing way above 26 pounds per square foot a year in our greenhouses, which in the industry standard, even with greenhouses, so your flat tray greenhouses, they're doing about 18 pounds a square foot tops. Maybe it's more like 15, but some of the really good automated ones will do about 18 pounds per square foot. We're at 26 pounds per square foot plus some, kind of leaving a little margin for, get people guessing a little bit.
Right. Sure.
Our CapEx, unlike a lot of vertical farms, is below $200 a square foot. So these vertical farms that you see, the ones that are just jam-packed with lights, they're all indoors, their CapEx is at least $300 a square foot, if not more, because all of those lights are really expensive, right? And they're just rows. It's like bunk beds of plants, right? Bunk beds of trays, and there's just lights upon lights. Each one of those lights is at least $600 times hundreds of thousands, and you get this CapEx number, which is enormous. And then lastly, our Opex numbers, and this is what you're asking about. Our Opex numbers are below $1.80, right? Well, I know for a fact
Per square foot, is that below
$1.80 per pound, right?
Per pound. Okay.
Yeah. So I know for a fact that no one is doing Opex, at least in the vertical farming or the greenhouse space. No one's doing it besides us, below $3. So we are that much better from an Opex perspective. And when we're that much better from an Opex perspective and that much higher on a yield perspective, that gives us the margin. And by the way, we're not even doing robotics yet, because that adds to CapEx, right?
Well, I was going to get into that in terms of your space and how much you guys are leaning into that. I mean, from a labor standpoint, are you still fairly traditional labor inputs?
Yeah, so that's the redemptive part of what we're after. We're going to use automation, right? We want to introduce automation, but where it makes sense. We want to introduce automation because we want to, not because we have to of margins. What we want to do is to employ as many people as possible. So I've got my great margins that I can afford to be competitive with conventional produce. I can do that while employing up to 30 people in our greenhouse full time with benefits. That's huge, because if we're going to be located, if we're going to be located and serving in and around food deserts, then I want to employ my neighbors. Again, I want to change society and culture on an individual basis, knowing that those individuals aggregately will change it on a larger community, cultural, and societal basis.
I'm curious, and so I'm certain that it's, given the environment, the controlled environment that you're in, that your input, fertilizers and nutrient, all pesticides, all that kind of stuff. Are you able to certify as organic? Do you guys go that route, or do you just go as I can't think the terminology when you don't certify organic, but you certify that you don't have any.
That's a good question. I think for us, there are the only thing stopping us from being organic really is honestly is the nutrients. We use salts, and for whatever reason, salts from the earth are not considered organic. There's a whole organic discussion to be had about the label. I mean, there's the organic lobby is super against controlled environment agriculture, because I don't think it's actually because it's organic. It's because it infringes upon their standards a bit, which is fine. It's fine. I think there's some companies that have embraced that, and that's why Shenandoah renamed to solely organic, right? And are really embracing the soil, and good for them, right? I think for a lot of the other CEA companies like ourselves, you will see a rise in a CEA type label with its own distinctives, right? Organic right now doesn't mean you don't use. I mean, organic doesn't mean you don't use pesticides. It just means that you use certain types of pesticides that are even some synthetics that don't help. Right? There's all sorts of mental pretzels that go on to figure out whether something's really organic or not. Not to mention, like, if your farm's organic, 3 years of soil that's been treated for 3 years or more. Well, what about the farms around you? What if they're not organic? What about the runoff that goes from their farms into yours? So, right. So it's like, there's just some mental gymnastics. It's fine. But I think from a CEA perspective, you're going to see its own CEA label with its own CEA distinctives, being around, hey, it's pesticide free. It's, there's no environmental contaminants. It's consistent year round. It's not hindered by seasons and then or weather patterns, and then there's probably something around locality too. So that's what you'll see. So when it comes to nutrition and when it comes to taste, I'll put ours up against any organic.
Yeah, and I asked that question. Obviously, we at Sunfed, we do a fair share of organics as well, and I just know in the space that you're in, when you go to that the lettuce category, especially in the packaged lettuce, that's a most of the things that you go and shop are all going to be organic. That's a space where when you're buying the clamshells or bagged lettuce, majority of that's going to be of the organic. So I was just curious how you were approaching that. So
it's an ongoing debate, right? when you get down to organic, organic is it's a feature and a function, right? The value props is really what we're after. And this is getting into the marketing and the marketing psychology. Everyone talks about features and benefits, especially in the tech world. Very few people talk about value props. And the value prop for organic is purportedly it's pesticide free, purportedly it's fresher, and purportedly it's more nutritious and it tastes better. So then my argument is, if I could match those, it's pesticide free, it tastes better, it's fresher because it's local, it's grown within 20 miles, 100 miles of where you are, and it's safer. Would you buy it? And it's cheaper. Would you buy it? You get to those value props. And that's why the organic, honestly, that's why the organic industry is so threatened by the CEA, because they're meeting their value props. It's not about whether it's in soil or whatever. It's about meeting those value props. You start to meet those value props at a better price, boy, you should expect some pushback.
Yeah.
Hey, Eddie, because I know Craig will just keep asking you questions, but before we go any further, I wanted to make sure we got some time in for some more of your personal insights. And so at the very beginning of the discussion, you mentioned a word several times that really rang true with me, because it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And especially after this last weekend when my father told me that he would be retiring at 79, after 55 plus years of owning a business and self-employed. You talked about identity, the word identity, which I think is super important. In a world where you hear a lot of chatter about working less, more exponentially, to your point, there's been some research that can link overall well-being to a strong work identity, and that folks that have a strong work identity tend to be able to work longer with less fatigue. I think it's super important.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think Craig, I know Craig and I both feel like our lives are intertwined with our hobbies and our work and our passions, and there's no need to shut anything off as far as I'm concerned. And I don't know, that's just the way I feel. And you're pretty passionate, and I'm very interested in the habits, or at least the mechanics of high performers, which you are, and whether you want to admit it or not. So I'm very interested to hear more about your take on that. How much division there is in your life between work and family, and obviously you have a family, we all do, and so it's pretty tricky. But the identity part, because for those that, going back to the comment about my father, is those folks, particularly people that retire young. Now, he's not a young man, so I suppose he's going to have an okay time with it. But folks that retire young seem to think that, what I hear the most is they struggle with identity, right? Retire regardless of financial circumstances, they struggle with identity because their work is their identity, their passions that are connected to work. And so just if you could talk a little bit more about that and how you live your life, so to speak. How important is exercise? How important is, obviously nutrition is very important. Maybe a little bit on those topics.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question to unpack, right? No, it's fine. I think for me at least, it all starts with purpose, right? If I don't know why I'm here on this earth, then everything sort of stems from that. And I think what you see, the manifestations of people not having purpose, is that, like you said, when they retire, they do about 6 months or a year of golf, and they're like sitting around there going, okay, what's next, right? Or they go travel the world and they sit around and think, okay, I've done this. This is not, there's a law of diminishing returns. You see it with the really wealthy, right? And I've had a chance to have a distinct, unique view into that world. And they're just, the reason people accumulate stuff, whether it's, hoarders or up to, the wealthy folks who have multiple boats and houses and whatever, is they're just trying to fill that sense of purpose. And they're putting I like to say they're putting a boat in a God-sized hole. It just, it's not fitting. It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. And so I think it all starts with purpose. And for me, my purpose uh, is to rest in the fact that I'm loved by God. That's really all it is. And as a high performer, and listen, it took me a long time to learn this, because for a long time I was driven by what I call performance-based acceptance. Right? If I did more, if I performed better, then people would like me more. Then intrinsically, honestly, I thought I would like me more. And I had a lot of years proving to myself that I was valuable. And it was when the switch flipped and I realized, hey, I'm valuable just because I am. Then it switched from performance-based acceptance to acceptance-based performance. And when I knew I was accepted by God who loves me, and more importantly, and by myself, I accepted who I was, then I performed out of that freedom. And so when you can find your purpose like that, then it goes to the identity piece. And then once I was able to accept that, then my identity became like, okay, what drives me? And I'm okay with what drives me, right? A lot of people are intrinsically not okay with what drives them. They feel guilty about it. They feel shameful about it. Okay, so, but that's because they live in isolation and they don't really have people to be around them and say, hey, I'm encouraging you on this, or, your passion is this, but it's a little misguided, right? Um, so for me, knowing that, then I realized and was able to articulate my passion, my plan in life is to grow and scale organizations that have a huge cultural impact, and then to cultivate really deep relationships. That's what I'm all about, right? So if I can articulate that. So anything I do, any board that I sit on, any company that I run, anything that I'm involved in, it's all about growing and scaling organizations that have huge cultural impact. And for me to cultivate deep relationships within those. So I don't like I know a lot of folks, but I've got a core group of friends, guys and gals, who I have very deep, very meaningful relationships, and I'm intentional about spending time with them. And so I think that's another thing is once you have that purpose and you have that identity, then you can go with a lot of freedom into being intentional about those and being unintentional about everything else. Right. So the things that I'm super interested in. The things that I'm not, I couldn't give a flip about. Right. And I'm all right with that. Right. I'm all right with that. But if I go back to that where I was before about having that performance-based acceptance, then I need to perform. I need to spin all the plates so that people like me, so that I like myself. Right. It's a totally different way of thinking. Um, but if your listeners, if y'all can switch from performance-based acceptance to acceptance-based performance, it'll be life-changing.
That's great. Um,
So that was, I was going to say that was an excellent
yeah.
question. I should have stopped asking long before, Ed.
Well, actually, even within the response, that flip you're talking about, I think that most successful people wind up figuring that out eventually. It's shortening the learning curve and figuring out how to accelerate sooner and get that, fulfillment or even just a sense of evenness, right? Not getting too high when things are high or down. It's not about the immediate success. It's about the overall, package or the overall mission or the overall passion that you're talking about. Obviously, we're all measured by something, and we have to produce results for sure. But that was all really good insight and good feedback. So I think about identity a lot and how how hard would you say has it been to surround yourself with like-minded individuals? And do you still have relationships you would say is just strictly, for fun, regardless of, how much you think about, the people that you interact with? I mean, because that kind of sounds like a job, the way you put it. I like the
Yeah,
idea, and it's definitely most beneficial, and it tends to just happen organically as well. Um, yeah.
it does. It does. I learned a long time ago to like relationships at the end of the day are all that's left, right? They really are. You're not your house, your car, your boat, your whatever is not sitting by your bedside when you
Mm-hmm.
die. And I had an old mentor in college. He was 70 and I was 20, but he always told me to begin with the end in mind and to think about what's on your headstone, on your grave, to think about the eulogy that you have that someone else is giving you. I hope no one ever mentions BuzzShift or Eden Green or the house that I have or the car that I drive or whatever in my eulogy, or much less on my tombstone. I hope they mention, hey, Eddy loved Jesus, loved others, loved his wife, his fam, kiddos, grandkids, whatever, was a faithful friend. That's what I want on my headstone. So if you know that's on your headstone, and listen, if you want your headstone to say like I grew $1 billion company, knock yourself out. Like, okay, I don't think it's going to matter much, but if that's what you want, go for it. At least be honest with yourself
Yeah.
about it.
Right.
That's not what I want. And so if I can go backwards from that and work my way backwards, then I'm going to focus on relationships. So very early on, I was dialed into the quality of relationships that I had. I was also dialed into the quantity of relationships I had, and that's just a part of the way I'm wired. But really, as I've grown older, it's really become to the quality. But you mentioned something about just being patient, and you still have to do the work. But the more that you have identity and purpose, the longer game that you'll
Mm-hmm.
play, right? And it's like compounding interest, right? So I have friends who I met in college at A&M in the core. The guys that you're close to, we say those are the guys that'll marry you and the guys that'll bury you, right? And I just continued to develop relationships with what my mentor said in what the end in mind, but then looked for guys and gals that will marry me and bury me. And sure enough, those folks over the years have been at my wedding. And then the folks that I've met up in DC helped my wife and I through our marriage, through the good spots, through the bad spots. And then we've passed that vision along to our kids that these are our friends who we want to spend a lifetime with, and it's worth developing those relationships. So I've got friends who are 25, 30 years in the making. I've got a great group of guy friends. I'm probably an anomaly. Um, I've got, I've got a list in my little journal. I've got a list of 40 guys that I keep in touch with, and it's intentional. There's a group of guys that I keep in touch with weekly. There's a group of guys that I reach out to monthly. There's a group of guys that I reach out quarterly. And then there's guys that I just, ad hoc try to reach out to, but I'm very intentional about
That's a
that.
big list.
And the guys that are weak, it's a big list. I know there's still that performance piece in me, but all to say is those guys are just, they have provided so much good counsel and directed me and helped me avoid some really, really bad mistakes and even some small mistakes that when you look at me and you're like, man, that guy's a high performer, everything he touches turns to gold. It's true and it's false. Like the only reason I'm able to be at this speed and have this, I'll just call it efficiency, life efficiency, if you will, is because my boundaries are my bumpers, right? These guys are so intertwined in my life. And even when, we catch up from time to time, their bumpers, especially the guys that are in my life daily and weekly, I have I can totally screw up, and I do screw up every day, but the wavelength on that is so small compared to if you don't have people in your life that are those good bumpers. That wavelength, that amplitude is really big. I'm getting really scientific now. I'm reading a book on quantum theory. Anyway, that amplitude is really, really big. That wavelength and amplitude is really big. And when your wavelength and amplitude is really big, it's volatile. Huge swaths of where you can go left and right, right? So that's how my friendships have kept me just dialed in, right? So when I made a decision to jump to eating green, there are three ways. And I know we're at an hour
We
right
usually
now,
go
right?
2.
But
Yeah.
really, okay,
This
great.
is
Yeah, I was gonna
usual
say.
for us.
Yeah. So
as long as you got time, we got time.
So there's when I had those three, that I talked about those 3 bullet points that I wanted to do with the hardware, software, exponential impact, and then the redemptive company. I ran it through a 3-step process, and I stumbled upon this 3-step process. I really didn't plan it this way, but one is I had to articulate it clearly and distinctly, just like I articulated to you guys. One, for my friends and colleagues, but more importantly for myself. Like I had to know what I wanted and be able to articulate that clearly. A lot of people can't do that or won't do that because they're afraid of what people will say, right? But if you're running in this freedom, you're not afraid of what people will say, because the people that matter, you actually want to run that through that filter. So that's the second thing I did. So I articulated what I wanted to do, where I wanted to be very clearly. And then 2, I ran it through my filter of friends and family. And those friends that are those bumpers that I talked about, they were like, I don't know about that. That seems really egotistical, or, that seems really selfish. No, that's about right. That's good. Like that's healthy. So that filter of friends and family, if you're honest with them and you allow them to be honest with you, a couple of things. One is they are going to they're going to tell you when it's coming out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, as the Bible says, right? They're also going to tell you if it's coming from a healthy place, right? So I need that. We all need that. We all need people who are going to tell us that's really healthy or that's really unhealthy. I try to stay away from right or wrong, right? For me, that the whole right wrong thing is just a disaster. And when you try to get into conversation and really deep communication, think about healthy and unhealthy, not just in terms of produce, nutrition, but also in terms of mental, spiritual, emotional. So they're able to tell me, hey, that's healthy or that's unhealthy. So clear articulation, friends and family filter to tell me where that's healthy or unhealthy. And then the third thing is I had to give it back to God. Some people say I'll throw it back out to the universe, right? But if I'm free with that clear articulation and filter, then all I got to do is push it back out there. And if it never happens, then it never happens. But I'm good with that. There's a guy named Terry Looper who calls it getting in neutral. So getting in neutral is the posture where you're good, whichever way it goes, right? Because you're just in neutral. You're not stepping on the brake. It's not gas. It's not idling. It's just in neutral. So I had to get in neutral. So when I did those 3 things, not too much later, after I kind of solidified all those 3 things, is when eating green came along. And so that's why that decision was so easy to make, is because I had articulated it. I knew it was in a healthy place because of friends and family, and I was good with the outcome, whatever the case may have brought. That was my decision process, but it intrinsically involves relationships. And that's why relationships to me are so important.
So yeah, and man, like I say, that is absolutely what you're talking about is really what we're trying to be about. I mean, your message and what you've been on journey wise is absolutely what Ed and I are trying to find ourselves and continue to go down that path. But hopefully, speaking to others, I'm just curious. have you from always been on this path? Did you, how did you get here? Right. I mean, did it start with when you founded the first company? Did something
Were you
trigger? I
born
mean,
with an espresso in your hand?
you know, that's,
Oh man, how did I get on this path, guys? I think honestly, it's through my parents. My parents immigrated from the Philippines in 1969 with about $70 in their pocket, and really just I realized very early on what they sacrificed to get myself and my sister to, even before we were born, right, to be in a totally different place than my cousins who are back in the Philippines. And I visit them often. Tried to pre-pandemic because it gave me a really good sense of where I could have been versus where I am now. So there's an immense amount of gratitude because I realized what my parents went through to come over here to the States way back when. And so you combine that gratitude with a sense of faith, with a sense of a higher purpose. And then honestly, there were folks all along the way, folks I remember and folks I've forgotten, who just mentored me, who poured into me. And I think there's probably, a guy named Ford Madison, who's that older mentor when I was in college. He just said, hey, wherever you go, find an older mentor and then be that mentor. So I've throughout my career, I've tried to find that one older person that I feel I just want to be under, and I am bold about asking them to be under them. And you'd be surprised how many people don't even ask, and how many people on the other end want to, but they're never asked, and so they never mentor. And then for me, it's just been instilled in me to take care of the folks I'm one step ahead of. And when you think about mentorship, you don't need to be like 20 years older. You can literally be 1 or 2 steps ahead. And so because of that, I've that's how I view it. I regularly meet with guys who are 10 years younger than me, and I don't view them as mentees or whatever. They're just my friends. And I view them, I often I forget how old I am compared to them. But it's just such a meaningful relationship, and they ask me, questions like you guys are asking me, and I should try to share openly about how my day, how my week, how my life is going. And so I think that type of relationship, both up and both down, has brought me to where I am. And that's where I started from folks pouring into me.
I think one of the key components or characteristics of that mentorship that I like the most is the honesty, right? I mean, so regardless of how you frame it or how you ask, or I've got an old guy that mentors me as well. He's on the screen there next to you. But I've never asked him to, but he's just honest with me and I'm honest with him. But in a world where there's so much sugarcoating going on, that, just being honest with people because they know that you have their best interests at heart, right? That's pretty powerful. It's actually a lot less common than you would think. So that's pretty cool.
Thanks. Well, I know you'll cut this out here. I've got to run. I'm way over on time.
Yeah, for sure. And so we appreciate it. I don't know if you have off the top of your head a quote, because we on the show we have we do our quote of the week, and then we typically do what we're eating. But I'm sure with based on where you're at in life and journey and everything, I'm sure you've got. I don't know if you have a quote, great. If not, no big deal. But it's been amazing, having you on here for sure.
Thank you. I think the quote or the thought I would share is, one I shared earlier, is begin with the end in mind.
Begin with the end in
mind.
mind.
We'll both use that one this week.
Love it. And Eddy, Yeah, I think I will as well. And Eddie, for sure. I want to connect on a. Me and you need to connect from a business standpoint as well as, like I said, we talked about Viva Fresh. I'll probably I've got your email, so I'll shoot you an email
Yeah,
with
right
some
on.
stuff. But somehow the growing what you're doing. I want to get you involved with the Viva Fresh and make sure that we get you over to that. So I'll get you some details on that as well. And no, I besides this podcast, I think it would be outstanding to connect with you and just talk about a lot of stuff.
Yeah, would love to. Yeah, and I'll see you out here at Viva Fresh.
Cool. And Eddie, so anything you want to leave before you go? How people can get in touch with you, where they can find your products? I mean, that might be there in the Dallas area. I guess is where you're at primarily right now, right?
Yeah, yeah. The best way to get a hold of me is just to go to edengreen.com. Eden, like the Garden of Eden, green.com. And then from a personal perspective, you can just go to Badrina.com, my last name.
Excellent. All right. Well, man, it's been a real pleasure. Like I say, I appreciate the amount of time you gave us today, and
We might need a part 2.
yeah, we may
Yeah.
we may hit you up for a second round of
Okay.
this, and because you certainly have a fabulous story, and again, a message that I think will benefit a lot of people. So,
All right. Well, I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Eddie. Look forward to meeting you in person
Yeah,
soon.
absolutely. You too.
yeah. All right, take
All right.
care.
Take care.
We'll see you, Eddie.
Bye.
So, Ed, I guess
sir.
we should. Do you have a quote for the day?
Yeah, we're both going to use Eddie's.
I guess that we could go with that for sure, man. But what a show, right? I mean,
yeah, that was good.
yeah. So
I think.
yeah, it was fantastic. So
I think he had a lot of information out.
yeah.
It was hard for me not to interrupt, and I finally had to because there
No,
was
I'm glad
those
you
things
did.
that I wanted to really get an idea of, and I even didn't get to ask like what's his exercise of choice or physical activity of choice, that kind of stuff. He was wearing a Whoop, by the way. Did you notice?
I did not notice that.
Yeah, after Mason sent me that that article, I was about to burn the damn thing.
And I got to be honest with you, finding out that somehow I'm in this mentor role. That's I hope that you
It's
were just saying
flattering,
that.
right?
I hope that you were just saying that for the show, because for God's sakes, I don't want to think anybody is actually, watching what the hell I'm doing as some sort of a guidance.
Look,
So.
I saw your air pressure going a little low, and I need to pump you up. So
Okay, that's perfect. That's good. As long as you're doing it out of that, I don't want it to be reality. Is all I'm saying. So,
too much pressure.
yeah,
Oh, shit.
yeah. It's
You
like
see
I
what
don't.
happens to egomaniacs, right? I mean, you don't
Yeah.
watch the news for the last 9 days. That's what happens when you have no bumpers.
Yeah. So Charles Barkley once said, he's like, I should be nobody's role model, right? And it's I don't want to be in that position. I'd rather be just a wino that people laugh at.
We don't say Charles Barkley's name in our house.
Really?
My wife claims that when she was young and lived in Las Vegas, Charles Barkley was at a nightclub and kissed her without permission and walked away, but so she hates him every time she sees him on a commercial.
Damn. Yeah, but that's highly possible. I would not doubt that.
I mean, I think it was pretty innocent, like a walk by, wow, pretty girl, kiss, keep walking, because I'm who I am. But yeah, it's just amazing how many commercials he's on now. Like, do really that many people care about Charles Barkley?
Hey, I guess. I don't know. All right. Well, Ed, I think that was. I mean, for me,
Home
I
run.
loved it. Yeah, for sure. I could.
Hole in one, let's say. Not home run.
Hole in one. That's a good
in golf parlance.
parlance. Thank you, man. You and the big
Mm-hmm.
words. It's like,
Yeah.
did you get a dictionary or something for Christmas? I mean, it's like
No.
the third big word you've used in the last couple of months, so it's pretty impressive. But anyway,
I used to sleep with a set of encyclopedias that we bought at Lucky's when I was a kid, when I lived in California. Yeah.
so encyclopedias, good Lord, that's going
I'm
back in time.
joking. Yeah. But do you
So
remember when they were sold at grocery stores? Like,
they were
because
sold door to
the
door
grocery
back
store
in
in our
my
town was
day,
either
buddy. They
Lucky.
came to your house, okay? And so literally the encyclopedias we had were sold to us by a door to door salesperson.
Mm.
And I think you
What?
bought, because we were so economically well off, we bought it on a one book plan. So basically, you started with A, and you purchased A, and then when you got enough money, you bought B and C. I'm pretty sure
Hey,
that's how
so
ours got funded.
you better not need any information on zebras for a book report or something
Yeah,
right off the bat.
exactly.
Because
Yeah. Well, thank God they'd already, by the time I came along, I mean,
Uh.
they'd had them. Although when I was looking at the information on zebras, in my day, it was probably information from the 40s, for God's sakes. It was
Yeah,
a little outdated. But anyway,
that's
long and
funny.
short
So
of
you
it,
had the encyclopedia sales guy, passing the milkman on the way to the
yeah,
door, right? Is
you
that how
did.
long ago that was?
Man, they sold vacuums. What a day. It's too bad. They sold vacuums door to door,
People were happy
encyclopedias.
to see solicitors come into the door. Now in Texas, not such a good idea
No,
to be a
no.
solicitor
No,
going
there'll be
door to
no
door.
soliciting. Technically my first job was selling candy door to door.
Mm.
So that's a whole nother pod. That's another story I could tell about. But it was quite a funky opportunity as a child, but certainly ingrained in me early days of selling. But all right, we got to get out of here. I see Mason. He's
So
trying.
sort of a different format today. So we're gonna skip what you eaten. I'm gonna commit to picking up some Eden Greens product over the week and try to come back with feedback on that.
That would be
Um,
outstanding.
and then we need a quote, but Eddie left us with one that we're gonna all share amongst ourselves. You remember what it was?
Well, now you tell me. Begin with the end. I mean, that's, live your
Begin
life.
with the end in mind. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Begin with the end in mind.
and and I'm right there with him. I try and think about that. For me, I think about Craig Slate at 80 years old, right?
Yeah.
And
You want to think
what's
about
that?
that? You really want to think about that?
Well, I do. I try and think that to
There's no
myself.
snowboarding in the picture. Let's put it that way.
There better be, baby. I'm going to be snowboarding at 80, but that's what I want to be. I want to be 80 and looking back, I try and think of myself as, am I going to be happy? Am I going to be, because that, you can't change it at that point, right? So you better think about the end with the end in mind. When I'm pushing 80, 85 or whatever, I want to be able to look back and think, you know what? Life well lived, right? I'm happy that of what I had in that rearview mirror, and I can already tell you, there's at 56, there's rearview mirror stuff that I'm not thrilled with. So I'm trying to change that dynamic and make sure the next 30 or 40 years, I'm able to do better, right? And that's
Yeah.
So I think that's a great quote. I think that is certainly words to live by, and I try and subscribe to it. Again, I disappoint myself daily, but
I know.
uh, but at least I'm aware of the disappointment. Whereas once in my life, I was not even aware of it. So
Powerful stuff.
it is, yeah. Man,
Yeah.
I tell you what, this is a freaking deep podcast.
Yeah.
Who who would have who would have thought we could freaking take produce and turn it into this? All right. Well, tell everybody how to get in touch with us. Give us the legalese, and let's
Keep the
get heck out.
feedback coming. Got some great feedback this week. We really appreciate. Either reach out to Craig or I on LinkedIn, and those of you in the industry can do that relatively easily, or reach out to us at the Fresh CrEd on Instagram, at CrEd Fresh on Twitter, also on YouTube and Facebook at the Fresh CrEd, or email us at thefreshcred@gmail.com. So super exciting stuff to come. We've got some more interviews lined out. We've got some good trade shows coming up. You said you're at SCPC this week. Hopefully you're having a good and productive event. We've got Viva coming up next month, at the end of next month. So you'll be hearing from us more soon.
Excellent. Well, hey, Ed, as always, it's a pleasure. Mason, thank you very much. Glad to have you here with us. And Eddy, even though you're gone, we really appreciate your time today. So, guys,
sure.
let's blast off and let's go make an outstanding Friday, an outstanding weekend.
Sure.
All right, y'all take care. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Bye.